Welcome to part 2 of the screener video on how to modify an internal assessment in classical studies. If you've watched the first part, it's about how to take an achievement standard task for 91204 from TKI and modify it to suit your assessment context. The first video deals with how to modify the teacher guidelines, and now this is about how to take those modifications through into the student instructions. It's really important that both of those parts marry up. So the first thing that I'm doing here is I've taken the sample task 2.5a. Because I'm going to modify it, I don't need that anymore, so we'll get rid of that. And because I've changed the context from architecture to looking at law and justice and democracy, then I'm going to get rid of that title. I'll think of one exciting one shortly. The other parts here I'm going to leave, so I'm going to leave the achievement standard title and the credits, and I will also have the version number, which is up in that part of the page you can't see at the moment. I think it's really important to have the achievement standard there so that students are able to see the progression between achieved, merit and excellence. So I'll leave that. Going on, I'm going to change first off the introduction, so we're not looking, as it says here, at ideas and values of classical literature. Instead we're looking at something a bit different, so we'll just make some changes. So I've just changed it to the relationship between classical and modern ideas about law, justice and or democracy. I'd like to give my students some choice, and they're going to demonstrate their understanding by explaining the relationship between those ideas and values. Bit of a typo, whoops. I'm going to leave it open for the students here how they will present. Obviously I'd liaise with students to make sure that their choice is appropriate. This part here is consistent for all of the achievement standards and the internal achievement standards anyway, and so I'm going to leave it as it is. But if we go down, there's some stuff there about primary and secondary sources, that's really important. But there is a thing here about time, so I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to give my students the 3 weeks of class time, but obviously that's up to the teacher as well. So we'll just move along. Now there are some preparatory activities to help the students get their head around what's required. This is really specific for the classical building, so I'm going to make some changes. First thing that I've just done up the top here is I've just changed it to looking at for primary source evidence about law, justice, and it should say and or democracy, and I'll fix it in a minute. And I've suggested that they choose either a Greek or a Roman context. But there's no reason that they couldn't do both. And the stuff here, I'm just going to give them some points. So to help them understand what to look for, I've given them some suggestions on law, justice and democracy. I would normally co-construct these with my class. And then, oops, that's weird, I'll change that how it's come out. And then I've asked them to look for exactly those same things but using modern context. So they need to have sources from each. Hang on. And then I've got rid of all that stuff there because it's not relevant for me, but instead I've talked about how I want them to gather their evidence, and I've suggested that we'll just change that there. So it did say that they should be using annotated images. I think for this one instead I've suggested annotations on literary text and or artistic primary source evidence. For a modern context that of course could include videos. And I've asked for, in this part here, I've asked for a bibliography as well because that's a really important way to ensure authenticity. I've just added a part in there that how to annotate, so about phrases, underlining, highlighting, making notes, etc. And then we get on to the task itself. The task itself was generally fine, but I think it needed a little bit more clarity around the change of context. So anytime there's a reference to architecture, I got rid of that. The first thing is to make sure that the suitability of the format is appropriate. You know your students and you'll be able to make that cool. I've suggested that they compare and contrast classical ideas and values about law, justice and democracy with modern ones, explaining in depth the reasons for the relationship. And the lasting influence of the classical ideas in later cultures. I've said cultures because I haven't specified if it should be one or the other. Depending on the scope, one may be enough. Again, just a reminder here about the bibliography because that's a really important way to assess authenticity. So if I go up the top, just to be really consistent, I'm going to give it a title. What law got to do with it? A little bit of Tina Turner there.